At dinner, in front of 14 people, my husband slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "Say sorry to my sister. Right now. Or leave my house." The room went dead silent. My fork hovered in midair. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And in that single moment, something inside me finally snapped, not in anger, but in clarity. This wasn't the first time his sister had humiliated me. It wasn't the first time he'd asked me to just let it go, but it was the first time he made the choice so clear. Apologize for something I didn't do, or walk away from the life I'd spent years trying to protect. So instead of crying, instead of begging, instead of shrinking like I always had, I stood up. I walked around the table, and I said one sentence that exposed a lie so carefully hidden, it destroyed 3 marriages, including my own. My name is Emily Carter, and until that night at the dinner table, I honestly believed my marriage was survivable, not romantic, not passionate, but solid enough to last. Mark and I had been married for 7 years. From the outside, we looked like one of those couples people quietly envied. A quiet suburban house outside Sacramento, 2 steady careers, no obvious scandals. We hosted holidays, we showed up on time, we smiled in photos. Mark liked to describe us as low drama. What that really meant was that I had learned how to stay quiet. I worked as a compliance analyst, reviewing contracts, financial disclosures, and regulatory filings. My job required patience, attention to detail, and the ability to notice what others overlooked. I was good at it, very good. I liked order, clarity, truth written in black and white. Mark worked in real estate development, a world fueled by ambition, appearances, and constant movement. Deals, investors, growth projections. Everything in his life moved fast, except the parts that actually mattered. In the beginning, I thought we balanced each other. I grounded him. He energized me. But over time, balance turned into imbalance so gradual I didn't notice it happening. Small things, at first. Decisions that used to be conversations became announcements. "Oh, I already told them we'd go. I figured this was easier. You trust me, right?" Whenever I hesitated, Mark would smile in that calm, reassuring way that made me feel unreasonable. "You're overthinking, Emily. Why do you always make things so complicated? Just relax." And because I loved him and because I wanted our marriage to work, I did. I relaxed. I let things go. I told myself this was normal. That was the first lesson I learned without realizing it. Peace, in our marriage, always came from my silence. Then there was his family, especially his sister, Rachel. Rachel was older than Mark, louder, sharper, and always positioned as the unquestioned authority in the room. She married into money, old money, and wore it like armor. She had opinions about everything, especially me. At family gatherings, she would tilt her head and smile sweetly. "So, Emily, still doing that compliance job?" She said that job the way people talk about hobbies, not careers. I'd answer politely, "Yes, I am. It's faces for you tell to 4 meanings. It's face with actually faces for you tell to 4 meanings." She'd laugh. "Must be nice to have something so stable. So safe." Everyone would chuckle, including Mark. If I looked at him, hoping just once that he'd step in, he'd squeeze my knee under the table. A silent signal. "Don't. Not now. Keep the peace." And I did. Over the years, the comments stopped being subtle. They became sharper. Public. Confident. Rachel would compare me to other women, women who brought more to the table, women who were better matches for men like Mark. And every time, Mark chose the same response. He minimized. "She's just blunt. She doesn't mean it like that. You're taking it too personally." Slowly, I began to doubt myself. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe this was just how families joked. Maybe love meant compromise. Endless compromise. By the time we sat down at that dinner, surrounded by 14 people and expensive table settings, I had already learned how to disappear without leaving my chair. What I didn't know yet was that Mark had already decided which side he was on. And that night, he was finally going to say it out loud. If my marriage had a center of gravity, it wasn't Mark. It was Rachel. Rachel didn't just exist in Mark's life, she dominated it. Every decision somehow bent toward her approval. Every family gathering revolved around her schedule. Every story ended with her success, her insight, her opinion. And if Rachel disapproved of someone, the rest of the family learned very quickly to fall in line, including me. At first, her treatment of me came wrapped in smiles and jokes, the kind that were easy to dismiss if you wanted to believe the best in people. "Oh, Emily, you're so brave," she'd say, raising her wine glass. "I could never stay in such a predictable job. Or worse. At least Mark doesn't have to worry about competition at home." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. That became another rule: laugh, or be labeled difficult. What hurt more than Rachel's words was the way the room reacted to them. No discomfort, no awkward silence. Just acceptance. As if this was normal. As if I was the one who didn't understand the joke. I started noticing patterns. When Rachel spoke, people listened. When I spoke, conversations drifted away. If Rachel interrupted me, no one stopped her. If I interrupted Rachel, Mark would clear his throat, a quiet warning. Let her finish. Not let Emily finish. Never me. One night, on the drive home after another dinner where I'd been quietly humiliated, I finally said something. "Mark," I began carefully, staring out the window, "does it bother you when Rachel talks to me like that?" He sighed. Not angrily. Tiredly. As if I'd asked something unreasonable. "You're reading into it again." "I'm not," I said. "She doesn't talk to anyone else that way." "That's because you're sensitive," he replied. "You analyze things. That's your job. But this is family. You can't treat family like a compliance report." That sentence stayed with me, because what he was really saying was, facts don't matter when it comes to them. After that, I stopped bringing it up. I started editing myself before I spoke, lowering my voice, choosing my words carefully. If Rachel criticized me, I told myself it wasn't worth responding. If Mark dismissed me, I told myself marriage required patience. But patience, I learned, has a cost. By the time the anniversary dinner came around, I already knew my role. Smile. Be agreeable. Don't embarrass Mark. What I didn't know was that Rachel had decided this dinner was the perfect stage, and that Mark, whether consciously or not, was ready to let her have it. Because some families don't need villains. They just need one person willing to stay quiet long enough for the system to keep working. And that night, for the first time, I felt something shift. Not anger, not fear. Something colder. Awareness. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Mark's parents were renewing their vows: 40 years of marriage. 4 decades of commitment, family, and standing by each other no matter what. At least, that's what the invitation said. Their house was immaculate. White tablecloths, candles placed just right, plates that probably only came out for special occasions. 14 of us sat around the long dining table, dressed nicely, smiling politely, playing our assigned roles. I took my seat beside Mark, folding my hands in my lap like I always did. Rachel arrived last, of course. She swept into the room like she owned it: perfect hair, confident smile, expensive perfume that lingered even after she passed. Her husband, David, followed a step behind, quiet and distracted, already looking uncomfortable. "Sorry I'm late," Rachel announced, not sounding sorry at all. "Traffic was awful. You know how it is when you actually have places to be." She glanced at me when she said it. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Compliments about the food, small talk, stories from the past. Mark's father gave a speech about loyalty and sacrifice, about choosing your partner every day, even when it's hard. I felt a strange tightness in my chest listening to him speak. For about 20 minutes, everything was calm. Then Rachel leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine glass. "So," she said loudly, "Emily." The way she said my name made my shoulders tense instantly. "You're still doing compliance work, right?" I nodded. "Yes." She smiled. "Wow. 7 years and still the same job. That kind of consistency is rare." I waited for the punchline. Mark stayed silent. Rachel continued. "I just worry sometimes, you know? About Mark settling. About whether he's really getting the life he deserves." The table grew quiet. I felt heat rush to my face, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm happy with my career." "Oh, I'm sure you are," Rachel replied quickly. "Some people don't need much to feel fulfilled." A few people chuckled nervously. I looked at Mark. He was staring at his plate. Rachel turned to him. "Doesn't it ever bother you? Don't you ever want more than comfortable?" That word landed heavily in the air. Mark finally looked up. "Rachel," he said, half warning, half weary. "It's not the time." She held up her hands. "I'm just having an honest conversation. Isn't that what family does?" Then she looked straight at me. "I mean, Emily, you don't mind me being honest, right?" 14 pairs of eyes turned toward me. This was the moment I usually laughed. The moment I deflected. The moment I saved everyone else from discomfort. My mouth opened but no sound came out. Before I could speak, Mark did. "Emily," he said quietly, his tone tight. "Just let it go." Something inside me twisted. Rachel smiled, victorious. And that's when I realized this dinner wasn't about celebration at all. It was a test. And no matter what I said next, I was already the problem. Rachel's smile widened, slow and deliberate, the way someone smiles when they know they've already won. "I'm not trying to be cruel," she said lightly. "I just think honesty is important, especially in families." Her husband shifted in his chair. "Rachel, maybe we should." She waved him off without even looking at him. "Relax, David. We're just talking." Her eyes never left mine. "So, Emily," she continued, "do you really think you're enough for my brother? I mean, career-wise, ambition-wise, life-wise." The word enough hit me like a slap. I felt my pulse racing, my palms damp against my napkin. I searched the table for a lifeline, any sign of discomfort, any hint that someone would step in. No one did. Mark exhaled sharply and finally stood up. "Okay, that's enough," he said, but his voice wasn't angry. It was irritated, like I had caused an inconvenience. Rachel tilted her head. "What? I'm worried about you." Mark turned to me. "Emily," he said, his tone hardening, "you're being too sensitive again. This is embarrassing." "Embarrassing?" I stared at him. "I haven't said anything." "That's exactly the problem," he snapped. "Your attitude. The way you're sitting there making faces." "Ader, I'm not—" "Stop," Mark interrupted, his voice rising. "Just stop. You're ruining the night." The room felt smaller, hotter, like the walls were closing in. Rachel crossed her arms, watching, satisfied. "Mark," she said softly, "I think an apology would clear the air." He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Then he looked at me and said the words I will never forget. "Emily, apologize to my sister. Right now. Or leave my house. My house. The one my paycheck helped pay for. The one I cleaned. The one I had called home." 14 people froze. I heard someone gasp quietly. I didn't know who. I waited for Mark to soften it, to say he didn't mean it, to laugh it off. He didn't. "Say you're sorry," he repeated. "For your tone. For your disrespect." I felt something inside me detach, like a cord snapping clean through. In that moment, I understood everything. This wasn't about Rachel's feelings. This wasn't about peace. This was about obedience. Apologize even if you're innocent. Or be erased. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I could feel it in my throat, my ears, my fingertips. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed my chair back. The scraping sound against the floor was loud in the silence. Mark frowned. "Sit down." I didn't. Rachel's eyes flickered with surprise. I stood up straight, my legs shaking but holding me anyway. "I'm not apologizing," I said quietly. Mark's face flushed red. "Emily, don't do this." But I was already moving. I stepped away from my chair. Then, another step. I walked around the table, every eye tracking me, every breath held. Rachel's smile finally disappeared, and as I stopped just short of her seat, I realized something terrifying and liberating at the same time. No matter what happened next, my marriage was already over. I stopped beside Rachel's chair. I could feel the heat of the room pressing in on me. 14 people. 14 witnesses. No place left to hide. Rachel looked up at me, clearly expecting something small. An emotional outburst, tears, maybe a weak apology she could mock later. Mark was already shaking his head. "Emily," he warned, "don't make this worse." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I didn't insult her. I simply said, "Rachel, the only reason you're considered successful is because my husband has been secretly covering your financial losses, using our joint marital assets, and I have the records." Silence. Not the awkward kind. The kind that sucks the air out of a room. Rachel blinked. Once. Twice. "What?" What did you just say? Mark's face drained of color so fast it was almost frightening. That's a lie, he snapped. She's lying. I turned slightly, just enough to look at him. No, I said calmly. I'm not. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I work in compliance. I audit financial documents for a living. I know how to read transfers, shell accounts, and misreported funds, and I've been documenting this for over a year. Rachel stood up so abruptly. Her chair nearly tipped over. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. Mark, tell her to stop. But Mark wasn't looking at her. He was staring at me. You went through my accounts? He asked quietly. You gave me access, I replied. You just never thought I'd use it. David, Rachel's husband, pushed his chair back and stood as well. What records? He asked, his voice tight. Emily, what records? I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Transfers from Mark's business account, I said, scrolling, into a consulting LLC under Rachel's name. Money moved to cover losses from her investments. Losses you never disclosed to your husband. Rachel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. David looked at her. Is this true? He asked. Rachel. She laughed suddenly, high and brittle. This is ridiculous. You're all overreacting. It's just family helping family. I looked at her. No, I said. It's fraud, and in some cases it's theft. Mark finally found his voice. You had no right, he said. You went behind my back. I turned to him fully now. You moved joint funds without my consent. You forged approvals. You lied to me, to your brother-in-law, to your parents. His mother gasped, one hand flying to her chest. Mark, she whispered, is that true? Mark didn't answer. Rachel rounded on me, eyes blazing. You did this on purpose, she hissed. You waited for a crowd. No, I replied. You did. Her husband took a step back from her, his face pale. How long? He asked quietly. How long have you been lying to me? Rachel reached for him. David, listen. He pulled away. I trusted you. Across the table, Mark's father stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Emily, he said, voice shaking. If what you're saying is true, this has legal consequences. Our court of the Mindrele. I know, I replied. That's why I kept records. Mark stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. You've destroyed this family, he said. I met his gaze. No, I said evenly. I stopped protecting a lie. Rachel's marriage collapsed in that moment. So did the image of the loyal son. And so did my own. Because as I stood there, surrounded by broken silence and exposed truths, I realized something with absolute clarity. The moment I refused to apologize for something I didn't do. The moment I chose truth over obedience. Everything they built on silence was doomed to fall. And nothing, not even love, could survive what had just been revealed. No one stopped me when I picked up my coat. That part surprised me. 14 people sat frozen around the table, surrounded by half-eaten food and flickering candles, like actors who had forgotten their lines. The celebration was over. Whatever version of family they had been pretending to be had cracked beyond repair. Mark followed me into the hallway. Emily, he said sharply, grabbing my arm not hard but firm enough to make a point. You can't just leave like this. I pulled my arm away. I can, I said, and I am. You humiliated my sister, he snapped. You humiliated me. I turned to face him. Your sister humiliated herself, and you let it happen to me for years. His jaw tightened. You didn't have to do it there, in front of everyone. That almost made me laugh. There was never going to be a right place, I said quietly. Because you never wanted the truth out at all. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Behind us, voices rose. Rachel crying, David demanding answers, Mark's parents arguing in low, panicked tones. The sound followed me like a wave as I stepped outside into the cool night air. For the first time that evening, I could breathe. I didn't go far. I drove to a small hotel near the freeway, checked into a room with neutral walls and a stiff bedspread, and sat on the edge of the mattress for a long time, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed nonstop. Mark. Rachel. Unknown family numbers I'd never saved. I didn't answer any of them, because for the first time in years, I wasn't trying to fix something that was never mine to fix. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not in anger, not in panic, in clarity. I explained everything calmly, the joint accounts, the transfers, the documentation, the threats to force an apology. The lawyer listened, then said something that stayed with me. You did the right thing by documenting. Now, let the law do its job. That sentence felt like permission. When I returned to the house later that week, Mark wasn't there. He was giving Rachel space, or so he texted. I packed only what was mine: clothes, personal documents, my laptop, the things that mattered. I didn't take furniture. I didn't take photos. I left the version of myself who had stayed silent in that house. By the end of the week, Rachel's husband had moved out. By the end of the month, financial investigators were asking questions. And Mark? Mark kept calling. Apologize, he said. Just say sorry and we can fix this. But I finally understood something he never did. An apology meant surrender, and I was done surrendering. The divorce didn't happen overnight. Nothing about untangling a life built on silence ever does. Mark hired a lawyer within days. So did Rachel. Suddenly, the same people who had watched me be humiliated for years were calling me aggressive, vindictive, and my personal favorite, dramatic. According to them, I had overreacted. According to them, I had destroyed the family. Mark's lawyer claimed I had invaded his privacy. Rachel claimed I had misunderstood the transfers. Their parents suggested carefully that maybe I'd been influenced by stress, or resentment, or insecurity. It was fascinating how quickly truth became an inconvenience. My lawyer wasn't impressed. She laid out the facts calmly, line by line. Joint accounts, unauthorized transfers, forged approvals, financial exposure that put me at legal risk without my consent. You didn't cause this, she told me. You uncovered it. That distinction mattered. Mark tried to negotiate privately at first. If you drop the documentation, he said during one tense call, we can settle this quietly. No investigations, no public mess. No, I replied. I'm done cleaning up after you. That's when the tone changed. He stopped calling me by my name, started calling me her. She's being unreasonable. She's trying to ruin me. She's turning everyone against us. Us. As if I was still part of his version of the story. The legal process took months. Financial reviews. Interviews. Requests for documentation. Rachel's husband cooperated fully. Mark didn't. By the time we reached mediation, the picture was clear. I hadn't just been a wife. I'd been a financial buffer. A shield. The judge didn't care about family dynamics or bruised egos. Only evidence. And evidence doesn't flinch. When the settlement was finalized, I walked away with my finances intact and my name clean. No dramatic victory, no applause. Just a quiet acknowledgement that I had been right to speak up. Mark looked smaller that day. Not defeated, just exposed. As we signed the final papers, he leaned toward me and said quietly, "You could have just apologized." I looked at him for a long moment. "And you could have protected me," I said. We both made our choices. Outside the courthouse, I felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Not because I had won, but because I had survived telling the truth in a room full of people who benefited from my silence. And I was still standing. I didn't rebuild my life all at once. There was no dramatic glow-up, no instant happiness, just quiet mornings. A small apartment with sunlight in the kitchen, and the unfamiliar feeling of not being afraid to speak. For a long time, I thought strength meant endurance, putting up with discomfort for the sake of peace. I was wrong. Endurance without boundaries isn't strength. It's erasure. After the divorce, I stayed in my field. I didn't hide. I didn't shrink. If anything, I became sharper, more confident. I began mentoring younger women in compliance and financial ethics, women who reminded me of who I used to be before I learned to doubt myself. Rachel disappeared from my life completely. Mark tried to reach out once, months later, with a message that started with "I hope you're well" and ended with "things didn't have to end this way." I never replied, because they didn't end this way. They ended the moment he asked me to apologize for someone else's wrongdoing. Here's what I know now. If someone loves you, they don't ask you to sacrifice your dignity to protect their comfort. If a family demands your silence to function, the silence is the problem. And if telling the truth destroys something, it wasn't built to survive it. Standing up cost me my marriage. But it gave me back my voice, my safety, and my future. And that trade? I would make it again every single time. You are not difficult for noticing harm. You are not disloyal for refusing to lie. And you never owe an apology for protecting yourself. Sometimes the bravest sentence isn't loud.